Hey guys, tonight we begin not with a philosopher or a conqueror, but with a few accidents of fate so bizarre that even the medieval church had to pause and say, okay, that's weird. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's hazy little journey together. The year was 1145 when England was still figuring out how shoes worked and everyone was named either William, Henry, or something that sounded like a sneeze. In the city of Winchester, two noble families celebrated the birth of baby boys, both named William. Because apparently originality was a sin back then. These weren't just any Williams. They were mirror images of each other. Born within weeks, raised in the same town, trained by the same swordmaster, and according to one monk, even baptized with the same slightly stolen holy water. Their families were proud, though it's unclear whether they were proud of their sons or simply proud of remembering which William was theirs at dinner. As adults, the Williams remained eerily similar. Same shoulder-length haircut, the medieval default, same scar on the left cheek from the same jousting accident because coordination wasn't genetic. And the same wife's name, Alice. Because back then, even romance lacked creativity. The monks chronicling all this insisted it was a sign from God, which is what medieval people called anything that made them uncomfortable, but too lazy to explain. One bright spring morning, both Williams went hunting in different forests at the exact same hour. Each spotted a deer, lowered his lance, charged forward, and immediately impaled himself on it. Same wound, same position, same day. It's hard to know what's more impressive, the odds, or the sheer athleticism required to lose to your own weapon. The news hit Winchester like divine slapstick. Two funerals were held in the same church, both led by priests named Thomas, both attended by widows named Alice, both of whom fainted at the same verse of the same hymn. Chroniclers didn't know whether to call it tragic or efficient. The bishop declared it proof that God's hand moves in mysterious ways. Sure, mysterious or just slightly sarcastic. The locals started calling them the twin Williams, though the idiot brothers who invented Darwinism might have been more accurate. To this day, historians can't explain how it happened. But personally, I suspect divine boredom, because if you were God in 1145, watching endless peasants farm turnips, you'd probably spice things up, too. It was the year 1170 and Canterbury Cathedral was the kind of place where miracles, politics and gossip shared the same pew. Monks were chanting, candles were flickering, and somewhere deep inside fate was clearing its throat. During evening vespers, as the choirs sang their usual hymn, something in the key of eternal suffering, one monk suddenly froze mid-verse. His name, according to the chronicles, was Brother Edmund. Though given medieval spelling, it might have been Edmund, or just guy who panicked during prayer. Without warning, Edmund whispered, "He is dead." Everyone stopped singing, which in a medieval monastery was basically a war crime. The prior glared at him like he'd just questioned the Virgin Mary's cooking. "Who?" someone asked. And Edmund, apparently now the spokesman for the supernatural, replied, "Our Archbishop." Minutes later, a messenger burst through the cathedral doors, out of breath and covered in horse sweat, shouting that Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, had just been murdered by King Henry's knights. Inside the same cathedral, the monks went pale. They had literally been singing in the choir while their boss was getting stabbed in the next room. Medieval acoustics were impressive, but not that impressive. Brother Edmund's prediction became an instant sensation. The monks called it divine revelation. The church called it evidence of holy favor. Everyone else quietly wondered if Edmund just had very thin walls and excellent hearing. Still, the story spread across England. Pilgrims flocked to Canterbury to see where the monk who heard death once stood. Artists painted him with a golden halo. Ballads were written and of course the church built a shrine because nothing says mourning like selling tickets to it. Years later, another monk swore he heard voices before a fire broke out in the cathedral. By then, the abbot had a rule. No more holy predictions during Vespers. They were bad for morale and insurance rates. Modern historians argue it was coincidence, a chilling, perfectly timed coincidence. But personally, I think Brother Edmund just had one of those sixth senses all introverts possess. The ability to detect when something truly awkward is about to happen. And in medieval England, that was basically every day. Italy 1350. The Renaissance was still warming up and most artists were busy painting saints who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. But in the city of Modena, one painter stood out. Tommaso di Modena, a man so talented, so ahead of his time that he accidentally invented prophetic art. A full century before the Black Death wiped out half of Europe, Tommaso painted a mural of monks wearing strange birdbeak masks. At the time, nobody questioned it. Artists back then could paint an angel wrestling a fish, and people would just nod respectfully. But 100 years later, when the plague arrived, doctors began wearing the exact same masks. Long-nosed, hollow-eyed, nightmare fuel with straps. A look Tommaso had already plastered across a church wall. Modern historians say it's coincidence. Medieval people said it was sorcery. Personally, I think Tommaso just had one of those unsettling talents for predicting misery. You know, the kind of guy who paints a boat right before a flood and says, "I don't know. I just felt like it." Back then, plague doctors stuffed herbs and vinegar-soaked sponges into those masks, believing they filtered out the disease. In reality, it just made them smell slightly better while dying. Tommaso's mural, however, looked almost identical, even down to the herbs tucked in the beak. When people noticed the resemblance a century later, panic ensued. Pilgrims came from all over Italy to stare at the painting, convinced it was a divine warning. The church called it a miracle. The local priests called it deeply unsettling, especially since the mural was located right next to the cloister dining hall. For a while, Tommaso's painting was treated like a holy artifact. Monks prayed to it. Villagers left offerings, and one abbot swore the eyes of the masked monks moved slightly every full moon. Spoiler, they didn't. The candle light just flickered. But medieval people never let physics ruin a good haunting. Sadly, Tommaso died before he could paint any follow-ups. Probably for the best. The last thing Europe needed was a fresco of people coughing blood and a title like Work in Progress. Centuries later, art historians still debate it. Visionary, coincidence, or just a man who accidentally painted history's creepiest trailer for the apocalypse? Whatever the truth, Tommaso di Modena remains the only artist whose work went viral 100 years after release. The year was 1346 and Europe was once again holding its favorite recurring event, the H100 Red Years' War. Somewhere in the chaos, King John of Bohemia decided that being blind shouldn't stop him from fighting. Because in medieval times, there was no concept of bad idea, only hold my chalice. John had lost his sight years earlier due to disease. But that didn't stop him from insisting on leading his troops into the Battle of Sai. His knights tried to talk him out of it, probably with sentences like, "Sire, you can't see the enemy." To which John allegedly replied, "Neither can they once I'm done." It was a great speech, right up until he tied his horse to his knight's reins and ordered them to charge. You can picture it. 5 horses galloping into the fog of battle, tied together like the world's deadliest friendship bracelet. Chroniclers say they fought bravely. Personally, I think they just couldn't stop. When the dust settled, the entire squad was found dead, still tied together, looking like a medieval cautionary tale titled "Why Helmets Aren't Everything." For most people, that would have been enough of a lesson. But no, 200 years later, history apparently decided it liked the bit too much to let it go. In 1546 at the same battlefield, another nobleman, a French commander named Charles d'Amponier, also partially blind, also in denial, repeated the stunt. Same field, same idea, same result. His last words were reportedly, "For glory, which is a noble way of saying, this will not end well. To be fair, medieval commanders had a gift for turning recklessness into legend. It's why half of Europe's coats of arms feature lions, eagles, or something on fire. Still, two blind men charging into the same battle centuries apart feels less like destiny and more like a cosmic rerun. The chroniclers framed both deaths as noble. They called it Kioalic courage. Everyone else quietly called it natural selection with extra steps. And so, King John's legacy became a medieval proverb. Follow your dreams, but maybe untie the horse first, because nothing says heroic quite like being remembered for the same mistake twice. It was the year 1231, a peaceful summer in the Rhineland, which in medieval terms meant only one minor plague and a tolerable amount of heresy. In a small Benedictine abbey near Trier, a group of monks decided to celebrate their good fortune by writing a new manuscript. It was an illuminated text titled On the Protection of Holy Houses. The title alone already tempted fate. The manuscript was ornate, detailed, and in the opinion of everyone involved, an absolute masterpiece. It contained prayers for divine protection against fire, flood, rats, and the occasional Viking. The abbot was so proud he insisted they add one more line to the final page. A flourish of holy confidence that read, "This library shall never burn, for it is blessed by the hand of God." If you just winced reading that, congratulations. You're smarter than the entire 13th century. 3 weeks later, lightning struck the abbey twice. The entire complex went up like a tinder box soaked in faith. The monks managed to save very little, though witnesses noted one odd detail. When the smoke cleared, a single parchment remained intact. The very page that boasted divine fireproofing. The survivors called it a miracle. Personally, I'd call it divine sarcasm. For years afterward, the story spread through the monasteries of Europe as a cautionary tale. Never brag in ink, they'd say, for God is reading. Of course, this didn't stop anyone. Monks continued writing absurd claims in manuscripts for centuries. This book cannot be lost. These words are eternal. Brother Anselm definitely didn't steal my quills. Spoiler. All of those manuscripts burned, too. The Church officially classified the incident as Mysterium Fidei, a mystery of faith, which is medieval Latin for we have no idea. But let's not talk about it. Local peasants, on the other hand, were far less diplomatic. They called it God's practical joke. Ironically, a later copy of the same manuscript, carefully rewritten by surviving monks, also vanished in a fire 40 years later. At that point, even heaven seemed committed to the bit. So the moral, if there is one in medieval Europe, never tempt the Almighty with confidence, especially not in writing. Because if there's one thing history proves, it's that divine retribution has excellent comedic timing. If there's one thing medieval Scandinavia was good at, it was dying dramatically. And nobody did it quite like King Olaf of Norway. Well, except for another King Olaf of Norway, who apparently thought dying the same way in the same valley 2 centuries later was good brand consistency. Let's start with Olaf the year 130, the Battle of Stiklestad. Olaf was already famous for trying to convert Vikings to Christianity, which as jobs go was like trying to sell salad at a meat festival. His subjects revolted obviously. During the fight, someone loosed an arrow that struck him directly in the throat. He died instantly. Holy, heroic, and probably regretting the lack of a helmet neck guard. Fast forward about 200 years, and Norway's PR department must have run out of new material. Along comes Olaf IV, another king with ambition, faith, and apparently no awareness of history. He rides into the same valley, same battle, same date on the calendar, and you guessed it, takes an arrow to the throat. You almost have to respect the dedication to symmetry. The chroniclers went wild. They called it divine mystery, a heavenly sign. Others noted that the second Olaf had chosen to fight in the exact same location as his ancestor, which feels less like destiny and more like poor decision-making. Historians later discovered that his advisors warned him about the omen, which he ignored, claiming, God decides the hour of every king's death. Apparently, that hour was right about now. Afterwards, locals swore that the earth where both Olafs fell turned red, stained with royal blood, they said. Modern geologists later confirmed it was just iron-rich soil. But in the 1200s, people didn't do science. They did superstition, and superstition paid better. Pilgrims started visiting the site to see the soil that bled. Though it's unclear what they expected it to do, wave. In the end, both Olafs were declared saints. Because when your monarchy keeps dying the same way, you might as well market it 2 kings, 2 arrows, one very sarcastic universe. It's almost as if the Norse gods, still salty about being replaced, decided to run the same practical joke twice just to prove they still had good aim. Of all the things the medieval church excelled at, crusades, corruption, and complaining about astrology, digging up dead popes was not supposed to be one of them. But leave it to Pope Stephen VI circa 897 AD to look at a corpse and think, you know what? This needs a trial. Here's the setup. Stephen hated his predecessor, Pope Formosus, with the kind of passion usually reserved for medieval in-laws. So, he ordered Formosus's body exhumed, 9 months dead, barely holding it together, dressed it in papal robes, and propped it on a throne in front of a council. The Cadaver Synod, as historians now call it, was exactly as unhinged as it sounds. Stephen screamed accusations of blasphemy at the corpse. A deacon was appointed to defend Formosus, which might be history's worst job description. The body was found guilty. Shocker. Stripped of its robes and tossed into the Tiber River. Even for the 9th century, that was home, older, wiser, and probably allergic to religious enthusiasm. The unlucky ones became a cautionary hymn. Fast forward 2 centuries and Europe, apparently running low on creativity, decided to do it again. Another group of children, also claiming divine visions, set out along a nearly identical route. Same holy destination, same naive optimism, same lack of adult supervision. Predictably, they vanished, too. Historians still argue whether it really happened twice or whether medieval chroniclers got confused, which considering their record-keeping is entirely possible. Wait, are we still on the First Crusade? But what's undeniable is that the Children's Crusade became one of those stories Europe couldn't stop repeating. Part miracle, part mass delusion, and part tragic comedy. The Church of course insisted the children were inspired by faith. Everyone else suspected mass heatstroke. The weather that year was record hot. The roads swarmed with bandits. And apparently not one adult along the way stopped to ask, hey, should we maybe not let the orphans walk to Jerusalem? If this story has a moral, it's that divine inspiration should always come with a chaperone. 2 crusades, 2 generations, 1 painfully avoidable mistake. And if history really does repeat itself, somewhere out there is a kid planning the 3rd one, probably with a GPO. Some families pass down heirlooms. Others pass down land, titles, or shiny swords. But in the 13th century England, the Cliffords seemed determined to pass down only one thing, bad decision-making. Their story reads less like a noble lineage and more like a cautionary comedy about hereditary stupidity. The first star of this tragic dynasty was Sir Walter Deckel, music, managed to get himself accused of murder. The records don't say what happened, but given the era, it probably involved ale horses and someone getting insulted over whose saint was holier. When the royal guards came to arrest him, Walter panicked, fled town, and disappeared into legend, or at least into Wales, which in the 13th century was basically the same thing. Half a century later, history and apparently God's sense of humor, repeated itself. Another Walter declosed of, you guessed it, murder. Same date, same town, same tavern. According to one suspiciously amused chronicler, when the sheriff showed up, this new Walter also bolted. The court notes simply say, fled and presumed guilty. At that point, even the scribes were rolling their eyes. You'd think someone in the family would have taken the hint, maybe changed the name, maybe stopped hanging around taverns on that specific day. But no. A century later, another Clifford, same name, same hairline of regret, was caught dueling a bishop's nephew, and once again vanished into the Welsh hills. Historians suspect the Cliffords weren't cursed, they were just consistently bad at hiding bodies. By the 1400s, doing a Clifford became local slang for running away from your own trial, which is saying something because medieval England had a lot of things to run from. The family did eventually produce one success story. A Walter who actually made it to old age without committing homicide. Unfortunately, he died falling off his horse during a parade. No one was surprised. The chroniclers called the Cliffords an unfortunate lineage. Personally, I'd call them the Middle Ages' answer to Darwin's theory. 3 centuries early and 3 IQ points short. Some families leave behind castles. The Cliffords left behind a punchline. If there's one thing medieval Europe loved more than religion, it was fighting about it. And nowhere did theological debate get quite as flammable as Monor, a fortress perched high in the Pyrenees and home to the Cathars, a group of monks who believed in peace, humility, and unfortunately living in a location that annoyed the Pope. By 1244, the Catholic Church had decided that peaceful heretics was an oxy. Fear death, which as it turned out was convenient. When the fortress finally fell, about 200 monks were given a choice. Convert to Catholicism or burn alive. They thought about it and said, "We'll burn. Thanks." Always nice when medieval theology doubles as a barbecue. Chroniclers claim that as the monks were consumed by flames, the fire formed a perfect cross against the night sky. The crowd gasped. The inquisitors called it a sign from heaven. Personally, I think it was just a windy night. Here's where it gets strange. Exactly 100 years later, another fire broke out in the same valley. Same date, same spot, same oddly cross-shaped flames. Locals panicked. "The spirits of the Cathars are returning," cried some. "Our firewood was arranged poorly," cried others. Either way, no one rebuilt anything there for decades. Pilgrims began visiting the site, claiming to feel holy heat rising from the ground. Merchants sold sacred ashes that were in all likelihood just dirt with branding. Even the church got nervous. Always awkward when your own miracle looks like divine trolling. To this day, historians can't explain the second fire. Lightning, freak weather, divine symbolism. Take your pick. But what's clear is that Monor became the medieval version of a cursed franchise. The sequel nobody asked for but everyone watched burn. The moral: never taunt fate with martyrdom. It apparently has an excellent memory and a passion for reruns. 2 centuries, 2 infernos, 1 very judgmental sky. If heaven really did send a message that night, it was probably this: "You people have learned absolutely nothing." In 1356, London was doing what London always did best, smelling bad. Overt taxing everyone and pretending God liked the English more than the French. It was a damp spring evening at Westminster Abbey, and the monks were deep in their usual routine, chanting, repenting, and hoping no one noticed how much wine had vanished from the Sacramento stockroom. That's when the ravens came. A whole flock of them, black, loud, and according to one chronicler, unusually judgmental. They circled the towers, sing in unison like a feathered jewelry. The monks froze. Birds in the abbey meant omens, and omens meant someone important was about to have a terrible week. One monk nervously joked, "Maybe they've just come for crumbs." The others didn't laugh. In medieval Europe, everything was a sign from heaven, especially if it scared you. That night, a storm hit. Thunder shook the abbey, lightning split the sky, and every raven vanished at once, which to a monk's imagination was basically the medieval version of jump scare cinema. The next morning, a messenger arrived from Windsor. Prince Edward, the heir to the throne, was dead. The monks promptly fainted, prayed, and began recording what they now called the prophecy of the ravens. Word spread fast. Pilgrims flocked to Westminster to see where God's birds of warning had appeared. Painters even depicted them with glowing eyes because subtlety wasn't a thing in the 14th century. The ravens were said to have returned every few decades, always before tragedy, plague, famine, or the latest royal scandal. 2 generations later, the same thing happened again. Ravens, storm, tragedy. This time, it was Edward III's grandson dying suddenly. The monks didn't even wait for confirmation. They started fasting on the spot. The birds had clearly developed a flair for timing. By the 17th century, superstition turned into policy. King Charles II, terrified of losing both throne and luck, issued an official royal decree. Let there always be ravens at the Tower of London. To this day, they're still there, fed, pampered, cackling, knowing that one bad day in 1356 earned them lifetime job security. Historians love to say that history repeats itself, but they usually mean metaphorically. In 1166, England decided to take that concept literally and wrested one of its greatest hits, the Battle of Hastings, now with extra déjà vu. It had been exactly 100 years since William the Conqueror's famous victory in 1066, where an arrow found King Harold's eye and half of England found new landlords named D something. A century later, local lords in Sussex apparently thought, you know what would be fun? Doing that again. And thus began the most unnecessary sequel in medieval history. The players, descendants of the original Norman invaders and the surviving Saxon families who still hadn't let it go. Both sides even brought leaders named, wait for it, William, because England, in its proud tradition of name recycling, simply couldn't resist. The fight started over a land dispute, which is medieval code for someone's sheep wandered into the wrong meadow. What began as an argument over a fence post somehow escalated into a full-scale armed conflict because this was the Middle Ages and that's how property law worked. According to the Chronica di Sexia, the battle took place on the very same hill where the Norman Duke had triumphed. Both sides clashed with a level of enthusiasm unmatched since the last time England forgot how to share. And then the truly bizarre happened. One of the Williams, a Saxon descendant, was struck in the eye by an arrow. Same wound, same hill, same name, same collective groan from the heavens. Chroniclers were beside themselves. A miracle, cried some. A sign, shouted others. Maybe we should stop standing here, said absolutely no one. The church claimed the coincidence proved divine will still favor the Normans. The locals meanwhile just started avoiding the place altogether. Farmers refused to plow it. Travelers refused to camp on it. And one particularly nervous monk wrote that the ground remembers. Centuries later, historians dubbed it the Second Battle of Hastings. Less famous than the first, but twice as ironic. 2 Williams, 2 arrows, 1 cursed hill. If time travel ever gets invented, that hill is absolutely off limits because clearly even the 12th century had its copy-paste glitch. If you're looking for a saint who didn't take martyrdom too seriously, look no further than St. Lawrence, the patron saint of cooks, comedians, and people who die ironically. His story began in Rome 258 AD. But his sense of humor aged perfectly into the medieval world, mostly because his death set an impossible standard for divine irony. When Emperor Valerian ordered the persecution of Christians, Lawrence, a deacon known for distributing arms, was arrested and told to hand over the church's treasures. Instead of producing gold, he brought a group of beggars and said, "Here are our treasures." Ancient sarcasm, the most dangerous kind. Naturally, the Romans sentenced him to death. But here's where Lawrence truly earned his halo. Instead of a quick beheading, they decided to roast him alive on an iron grill. As the fire blazed beneath him, witnesses claimed he called out, "Turn me over. I'm done on this side." Even in agony, the man was workshopping material. Some say he added, "You may eat now." Though that might have been medieval fanfiction, the legend spread fast. Monks across Europe adored him, a saint who cracked jokes while literally on fire. Reginald died soon after writing it, which is pretty on brand for prophets. His manuscript sat forgotten for nearly 300 years. Gathering dust and irony in equal measure. Then in the 1500s, the prophecy suddenly made a terrifying comeback. Two monarchs, Henry II of France and Henry VII of England, ruled their respective kingdoms at roughly the same time. Both obsessed with power, vanity, and questionable relationship decisions. They were in many ways the medieval equivalent of two men racing to out-self-destruct. In 1559, King Henry of France entered a jousting tournament to show off his chivalry vigor. It ended with a lance splinter through his eye. A decade earlier, Henry VIII had died from a festering leg wound caused by, wait for it, a jousting accident. Two Henrys, two kings, two absurdly similar demises, one prophecy that aged a little too well. When scholars rediscovered Brother Reginald's manuscript, panic spread faster than the plague. Pamphlets were printed, preachers ranted, and peasants started checking their calendars for world-ending vibes. The Church condemned the text as coincidental blasphemy, which is medieval for we can't explain this, and it's making us uncomfortable. Of course, the world didn't end unless you count the rise of Protestantism, several wars, and the death of jousting as a respectable hobby. The mirror prophecy became one of the Middle Ages' most famous coincidences. Two kings, same name, same wound, same stupid hat. If God does have a script writer, this was the episode where they really leaned into the symbolism. Some people dream of dying peacefully in their sleep. Others hope to go out heroically in battle. But in 1199, one monk named Brother Elred managed to die the way few men ever do, in a fit of laughter. And somehow it made perfect sense for a man who'd spent his entire life mocking death. Brother Elred was no ordinary monk. Before taking vows, he had been a jester in the court of a minor English noble, a man paid to make drunk aristocrats snort ale through their noses. But somewhere between the endless banquets and the occasional food fight, Elred decided to repent. He joined a monastery, traded bells for robes, and became a surprisingly good preacher. If your idea of holiness included punchlines, the other monks loved him most of the time. His sermons had names like God's patience and the abbot's lack of it. He once carved a smiling face on the refectory door and called it St. Optimus. When asked why he laughed so much, he reportedly said, "Because the devil hates joy, and I love annoying him." Naturally, this didn't sit well with the abbot, who warned Elred that laughter leads to sin. Elred replied, "Then hell must be a very boring place. Somewhere, an angel probably face-palmed." One stormy night, lightning struck the Abbey's bell tower. The stone cracked, the roof shook, and a statue of Saint Felix the Cheerful, which Elred himself had commissioned, toppled from its niche. The heavy stone figure landed right on him, killing him instantly. Witnesses said he was laughing at the time, having just told a joke about divine timing. The chronicler's entry reads, "Brother Elred met his end in laughter, as foretold by his own jest." The abbot called it a warning. The younger monks called it poetic. Personally, I call it a stand-up set with perfect comedic structure, setup, irony, punchline. In death, Elred became an unofficial saint among novices. The patron of joy, bad timing, and people who just can't keep a straight face during prayer. His epitaph, according to rumor, simply read, "He laughed. God laughed louder." If medieval Europe ever had a sense of humor, it died with Brother Elred. And probably chuckled all the way to heaven. In the harsh sun-baked highlands of Lusitania, a young shepherd named Viratus watched over his flock with more patience than most generals ever had for their men. The land was unforgiving, rocky slopes, thin soil, and predators that circled the herds by night. But it was there, among the wolves and the wind, that Viratus learned endurance. Each day was a battle between man, beast, and hunger. And in those hills, the Romans were just another kind of predator. Rome saw the Iberian tribes as barbarians, wild, untamed, and conveniently taxable. To them, shepherds like Viratus were beneath notice unless tribute was due or rebellion brewing. They came demanding grain, gold, and men for their legions. But the Lusitanians were not easily bent. When the tax collectors came again, this time backed by steel, the shepherds picked up their crooks and turned them into spears. Viriatus fought his first skirmish not as a soldier, but as a man defending his home. The Romans expected quick submission. Instead, they met cunning resistance. Viriatus knew every ravine, every narrow trail where cavalry could not follow. When the invaders marched through valleys, his people vanished into the mountains only to strike from behind. The shepherd became a strategist, his hills the perfect classroom. He was no aristocrat, no general born to command. Yet even among warriors, Viriatus stood apart, calm, calculating, and incorruptible. His fellow tribesmen saw in him a leader who fought not for plunder, but for dignity. Word spread of the shepherd who humiliated Roman columns with nothing but patience and terrain. In a world where loyalty was often bought, his could not be. The Romans, of course, labeled him a bandit. That was their favorite term for anyone who refused to kneel. But even some Roman officers began to murmur admiration, grudgingly perhaps, but sincerely. Viriatus fought like nature itself, silent, elusive, and merciless when cornered. By the time Rome realized the scale of their problem, the shepherd of the hills had become something larger than a man. He was a myth in the making, a ghost in the mountains, whose flocks had long since turned into armies. And to them, this land of rugged mountains and wild rivers was merely another line on a growing map. But to the locals, hunters, shepherds, and hill folk, it was their motherland. And mothers aren't given up without a fight. At first, Viriatus wasn't a general. He was a survivor. When Rome's prior demanded tributes and hostages, entire villages were enslaved or slaughtered. He barely escaped one such massacre. Having witnessed his friends cut down and his kin taken away. That was the day he changed. The shepherd dropped his crook and picked up the sword. The man who once guarded sheep would now guard his people. Viriatus joined a small band of rebels who hid in the hills. Their weapons were mismatched. Rusty swords, hunting spears, even farm tools. But they had something Rome didn't. Patience. Viriatus studied his enemy like a wolf studies a herd. He learned how their columns moved, how their scouts reported, how their discipline turned to chaos once the terrain worked against them. The first ambush came at dawn. Roman soldiers were marching through a narrow pass, tired and overconfident. Suddenly, stones rolled down the slopes, arrows whistled from the trees, and men screamed as the mountains came alive. The Romans fought bravely, but not wisely. They couldn't see their enemy, only shadows that struck and vanished. When it was over, hundreds of legionaries lay dead, and Viriatus had become a name whispered with awe and fear alike. Word spread fast. A new leader had risen in Lusitania. A man who fought like the wind and disappeared like smoke. Rome sent more troops, but every campaign ended the same way. Ambush, retreat, humiliation.